The gate groaned, a protracted sigh of rust and neglect, as I pushed it open. Blackwood Cemetery, a fitting name. The fog hung thick, a damp, woolen shroud clinging to the headstones and blurring the edges of the world. Each breath tasted of mildew and something else, something vaguely metallic like old pennies left out in the rain. The bells, distant and wrong, tolled a mournful cadence that had no place in this hour. It wasn't noon. It wasn't evening. It was simply wrong. I carried a toolbox, its weight a familiar comfort against the tremor in my hands. The caretaker's cottage needed more than just patching. It needed exorcising. A rigid routine, I reasoned, was the best defense against the tide of memories threatening to drown me. The sea had taken enough. A Siamese cat sat perched atop a crumbling mausoleum, its blue eyes gleaming like chips of ice. Its grin was unsettling, too wide, too knowing for an animal. It watched me, a silent, unwavering observer. I ignored it, focusing on the path ahead, the gravel crunching under my boots a lonely percussion against the pervasive dripping. Fuh, drip, drip, drip. A relentless rhythm, like a morbid metronome counting down to something I couldn't name. The cottage was smaller than it appeared from the gate. The air inside was stagnant, heavy with the scent of decay and forgotten dust. I set the toolbox down with a clatter that echoed unnervingly in the small space. The wallpaper peeled in long, mournful strips, revealing patches of faded floral patterns beneath. I ran a finger across the surface, the texture rough and brittle under my touch. The ticking of a grandfather clock, muffled but insistent, emanated from a corner, a ghostly heartbeat within the silence. My task was simple: repair the leaky roof, reinforce the crumbling foundation. Physical labor, tangible progress, something to anchor me to reality. I started with the roof, the wood groaning in protest as I climbed. The fog pressed against the glass of the single window, distorting the view of the cemetery into a swirling spectral canvas. I catalogued the headstones as I worked, tracing the eroded inscriptions with my fingertips. Lost to the sea, consumption, accident. Each a tiny tragedy, a life extinguished by the unforgiving coast. The names blurred together, a litany of loss echoing my own ghosts. The cat followed me, padding silently along the overgrown path below. Its purr was a low, resonant rumble, a counterpoint to the dripping and the distant bells. I tried to ignore it, but its gaze felt intense, calculating. The gothic midnight palette of the cemetery deepened as the afternoon wore on. The shadows stretched long and distorted, swallowing the headstones whole. The fog seemed to thicken, pressing closer, a suffocating embrace. I paused, wiping the sweat from my brow, and noticed a sudden weight on my chest. Not crushing, but a palpable pressure, as if someone were sitting beside me, breathing down my neck. I glanced around, expecting to see something, but there was nothing, only the fog, the cat, and the endless procession of silent stones. I resumed my work, dismissing the sensation as exhaustion. The sea had a way of playing tricks on the mind, but the feeling lingered, a prickling unease at the back of my neck. I felt it again as I descended the ladder, the weight, the presence. And then, as I stood staring out into the swirling fog, I knew I wasn't alone. The distinct sensation of eyes fixed upon me, cold and unwavering, pierced through the damp chill. A silent, unseen audience. The weight hadn't vanished, it lingered. A phantom pressure on my sternum, a constant reminder of unseen eyes. I told myself it was the fog, the dampness seeping into my bones, the relentless toll of the sea. But the feeling of being watched intensified, a prickling awareness that stretched beyond the veil of mist. I needed to do something. Anything. The ivy was a suffocating blanket, clinging to the headstones like desperate fingers. I knelt, the gravel biting into my knees, and began to pull. The vines resisted, a tangled mass of green and brown, releasing a cloying floral scent as they tore free. It was a sickly sweetness, initially subtle, but now growing stronger, layered with that same metallic tang I'd noticed upon arrival. Like iron filings blooming in a damp flower, each tug dislodged a shower of damp earth and decaying leaves. The inscription beneath the ivy was almost completely obscured, a jumble of eroded letters. I scraped at the stone with my fingers, revealing fragments of a name, El-Abeth. The rest was lost to time and neglect. The crunch beneath my boot was sickeningly soft, a dry whisper against the dripping silence. I ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. Routine. That was the key. The cat watched, its blue eyes gleaming in the gloom. It hadn't moved from its perch on the mausoleum. Its purr vibrated through the air, a low, unsettling hum that seemed to amplify the silence. I felt a flicker of annoyance, a primal urge to chase it away. But I resisted. It was just a cat. A strange, unsettling cat, but a cat nonetheless. Then I felt it. A small, smooth object dislodged from the earth as I ripped away a particularly stubborn strand of ivy. I brushed away the dirt and stared. A tooth. A human tooth, perfectly preserved, nestled amongst the roots. It was absurd. Grotesque. I picked it up, turning it over in my fingers. The enamel was smooth, almost polished. It felt wrong, alien. In my hand, a wave of nausea washed over me. I wanted to drop it, to scrub my hands raw, but something held me back. Curiosity. A morbid fascination. I examined it more closely, dismissing it as a bizarre, natural occurrence. The earth could yield strange things. Twisted roots, petrified wood. A misplaced tooth wasn't beyond the realm of possibility. The cat padded closer, its movements silent and deliberate. It stopped a few feet away, its grin seeming broader, more pronounced than before. It lowered its head and began to meticulously groom itself, licking its paws with a disturbingly human-like precision. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I tried to bury the tooth, pushing it back into the earth beneath the ivy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. That TBI was being watched. I returned to the cottage, the weight on my chest heavier than before. The grandfather clock ticked with a maddening regularity, each tick a hammer blow against my sanity. Later, as the fog pressed against the windows, I found myself drawn back to the headstone. I told myself I was checking my work, ensuring the ivy hadn't regrown. But I knew that wasn't true. I knelt again, the gravel crunching under my weight, and stared at the spot where the tooth had been. It was gone. The earth was smooth, undisturbed. Then, I saw it. A flicker of movement in the shadows. A shape coalescing from the swirling fog. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. It was small, delicate, and utterly out of place. A porcelain doll. It stood perfectly still, its painted eyes fixed directly on the empty patch of earth where the tooth had been. The fog seemed to cling to it, obscuring its features, making it appear as if it had simply materialized from the shadows. A faint, high-pitched finklick echoed from within the doll, a sound like porcelain shifting against porcelain. The nightmares returned, a churning sea of brine and splintered wood. I woke with a taste of salt on my tongue, the phantom rocking of a ship beneath my feet. Images flashed, 20 men in oilskins, faces obscured by grotesque masks, a vast, indifferent ocean swallowing everything whole. The weight settled on my chest, heavier this time, a suffocating pressure that stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't the dampness. It wasn't the fog. It was something else. I forced myself out of bed, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed, the sound distorted and mournful, as if the mechanism itself were weeping. I needed routine. A tangible task to anchor me to reality, the cemetery, clearing the ivy. The walk was a slow, deliberate act of defiance against the encroaching dread. The fog clung to everything, a spectral shroud muffling the world. The distant church bells, ringing at an impossible hour, twisted into a discordant melody that grated on my nerves. Seven-dong-dong, each chime a hammer blow against the fragile walls of my composure. The ivy was thicker than I remembered, a tangled fortress guarding the forgotten. I knelt, the gravel cold and damp beneath my palms. The cat was there, of course, perched atop the mausoleum, its Siamese fur gleaming in the dim light. The grin was wider than I recalled, unsettlingly human. It watched me, those blue eyes gleaming with an unnerving intelligence. A low purr vibrated from its throat, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to sync with the ticking of the clock. As I began to pull at the vines, a sharp, stinging sensation erupted on my arm. I recoiled, examining the skin, a fresh scratch, thin and crimson, laced with a network of tiny black veins. I didn't remember getting it. Panic flared, a cold, suffocating wave. I scrubbed at it with my sleeve, the fabric catching on the raw skin. Then I heard it, a high-pitched whine, like 1,000 cicadas buzzing in unison. It intensified, a relentless crescendo that threatened to shatter my eardrums. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. The purring of the cat seemed to amplify the sound, a mocking counterpoint to my distress. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the whine ceased, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. I looked down. The cat was crouched, its head tilted, meticulously devouring something from the ground. Tiny, black shapes, wriggling and iridescent, vanished down its throat with disturbing efficiency. Insects. Swarming over the scratch on my arm, a wave of nausea rolled through me. The memory lapses were becoming more frequent, more insidious. I struggled to recall the faces of my family, the details of my past. Fragments floated to the surface, infundi, a storm-tossed deck, the cries of men, the icy grip of the sea. But the context, the narrative thread, remained elusive, lost in the swirling fog of my mind. Later, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion, I found myself back in the cottage. The fog pressed against the windows, obscuring the world beyond. The dolls, they were closer. The porcelain faces stared out from the shelves, their painted eyes seeming to follow my every move, and there amongst them was the doll I'd found in the cemetery. It stood slightly forward as if eager to observe. I froze. Something about its face, it wasn't just a painted mask. There was something familiar in the set of its eyes, the curve of its mouth. I squinted, straining to see through the gloom, a flicker of recognition, a name, half forgotten, rising from the depths of my memory. Finnegan. Thomas Finnegan. My shipmate, the one they said drowned during the storm. I stared at the doll, the weight on my chest becoming almost unbearable. It wasn't just a doll. It was a mockery. A twisted porcelain echo of a man I thought lost to the sea. His eyes, once full of laughter, now held a chilling, vacant stare, a silent accusation. The weight settled deeper, a physical manifestation of the dread that clung to me like the fog. Finnegan's face, frozen in porcelain mockery, lingered behind my eyelids. It wasn't a memory, not really. More like a shard of glass, sharp and unwelcome, pressed against the soft tissue of my mind. I needed to understand, needed to find something, anything, to explain the dolls, the nightmares, the gnawing emptiness where my past should be. The cemetery felt different this time. The familiar paths warped and twisted by the thickening fog. The trees loomed, their branches skeletal against the oppressive gray. Each step crunched on the damp gravel, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the pervasive silence. The cat, a silent shadow, padded ahead, its grin somehow wider, more knowing. It seemed to want me to follow. A rhythmic thump, 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 thump echoed in my ears, the phantom pulse of the ship, the relentless beat of the ocean. The air grew colder, heavier, laced with the scent of wet earth and something else. Something acrid, like burnt sugar and decay. I stumbled, my hand brushing against the rough bark of a weeping willow. Its branches hung low, a curtain of sorrow obscuring the ground beneath. The cat stopped, its blue eyes fixed on a spot at the base of the tree. A low, guttural peacock escaped its throat, a sound I hadn't heard before. I knelt, the dampness seeping through my trousers. The ground was uneven, choked with gnarled roots that writhed like frozen serpents. Something glinted beneath them. I dug, my fingers scraping against the cold earth. It was metal, small, round, and strangely smooth. A whistle, silver, tarnished with age, but undeniably silver. As I lifted it from the earth, a faint hum resonated through my bones. It wasn't a sound I heard, so much as Sivin felt, a vibration that tickled the back of my teeth. The cat let out a satisfied hiss, rubbing against my leg. The humming intensified, a low, resonant drone that seemed to vibrate the very air around me. I brought the whistle closer to the dolls, and the humming escalated, a discordant chorus that made my head ache. Fragments of memory surfaced, fleeting and disjointed. A circle of men chanting in a language I didn't understand. A bonfire casting grotesque shadows on their faces. A silver whistle held aloft in the flickering light. Ritual. The word echoed in my mind, cold and sharp. I recoiled, dropping the whistle. The humming ceased abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The memory lapses were accelerating now, the gaps widening. I struggled to recall the faces of my crewmates, the names of my family. The image of my mother's smile dissolved like smoke. My father's voice faded into the fog. Who was I? Where did I come from? The questions hammered at my skull, each one a fresh wave of despair. The cat nudged the whistle with its nose, a silent urging. I picked it up again, hesitantly. The humming returned, softer this time, almost hypnotic. The fog seemed to swirl, to coalesce into shapes, into faces. Faces I thought I'd forgotten. Faces of men I'd sailed with, faces of men I'd lost, but they weren't quite right. Their features were blurred, distorted, their eyes vacant and hollow. A sudden wave of nausea washed over me, the metallic tang of blood rising in my throat. The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I gasped, clutching at the willow for support. The scent of burnt sugar intensified, overwhelming. Then I heard it. A sound so fleeting, so ethereal that I almost dismissed it as a trick of the fog. A child's laughter. High-pitched, innocent, and utterly chilling. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, swirling around me like the mist itself. The sound faded, leaving a silence more profound than any I'd known. But the feeling lingered, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the certainty that I was no longer alone. The cat, its grin impossibly wide, turned its head towards the fog, listening. The laughter clung to the air, a residue of something utterly wrong. It wasn't playful, not even mocking. It was expectant. The cat, its grin a predatory curve in the gloom, remained fixed on the swirling fog. I felt a prickling on my skin, 1,000 phantom eyes upon me. The weight settled on my chest, a tangible pressure that stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't crushing, not yet, but a constant, unsettling insistence. The cemetery opened subtly, a path I hadn't noticed before, winding deeper amongst the ancient stones. The fog thickened, pressing in, damp and cold, against my face. It smelled of lilies, sickly sweet and cloying, a perfume designed to mask something foul. My vision swam, momentarily blurred by the floral scent, and I stumbled, catching myself on a lichen-covered headstone. The inscription was worn, almost illegible, but I traced the letters with a trembling finger, lost to the deep. The cat padded ahead, its silent form a guide through the labyrinth of stone and fog. I followed, drawn by an invisible thread, a compulsion I couldn't resist. The headstones grew larger, older, their surfaces carved with grotesque symbols, spirals, knots, and stylized depictions of something. I couldn't quite place it. They weren't angels, not saints, something older, something other. The rasp of porcelain against stone echoed around me as I brushed past a cluster of dolls, their painted eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. Another memory surfaced, violent and fragmented. A circle of men, faces illuminated by a bonfire, chanting in a guttural tongue. The air thick with the smell of salt and something else, something acrid and metallic. A sacrifice. I recoiled. A wave of nausea over me. The image fractured, dissolving into a jumble of faces and shadows. Were these memories mine? Or were they implanted, fabricated to torment me? The line blurred, the certainty of my own past eroding with each passing moment. The weight on my chest intensified, making it difficult to breathe. I clawed at my collar, gasping for air. The cat stopped, its blue eyes fixed on a particular headstone, its grin widening. I approached cautiously, my heart hammering against my ribs. The headstone was unusually large, the inscription carved in a language I didn't recognize. I ran a hand over the cold stone, and another memory exploded in my mind. A whaling ship tossed on a raging sea, men screaming, drowning, a silver whistle held aloft in a desperate ritual. Doubt gnawed at me. The memories were too vivid, too consistent. They felt manufactured. I glanced down at my hands, expecting to see them trembling, but they were steady, almost unnaturally so. I felt detached, as if observing myself from a distance. The floral scent intensified, blurring my vision once more. The cat let out a low, guttural funtark, a sound of anticipation. I stumbled towards a crumbling mausoleum, its stone facade stained with moss and decay. Within, the air was stagnant, heavy with the scent of dust and decay. The dolls were everywhere, arranged on shelves, perched on pedestals, their porcelain faces staring blankly ahead. I reached out hesitantly and touched one. A cascade of images flooded my mind. For fun, a young woman bound and gagged, lying on a stone altar. A silver whistle pressed against her lips, the chanting louder now, more insistent. The weight on my chest became almost unbearable. I staggered backward, knocking over a porcelain doll. It shattered on the stone floor, the sound echoing through the mausoleum like a gunshot. I caught my reflection in the glassy eyes of another doll, and froze. It wasn't quite my face, it was distorted. The angles were wrong, the features subtly altered, and then I saw it. Petal-like growths, delicate and pink, blooming along my jawline, spreading across my neck. They pulsed with a faint internal light. The cat let out a slow, deliberate hiss. The petal-like growths felt wrong, not painful, not precisely, but alien. Like something blooming where it shouldn't, a grotesque mockery of life. The cat's hiss vibrated in the stillness of the mausoleum, a low, guttural rumble that seemed to emanate from the very stone itself. I blinked, trying to clear the floral haze from my vision, to reconcile the distorted reflection with the memory of my own face. The weight on my chest pressed down, a tangible burden that made each breath a conscious effort. The chanting, it had been a whisper before, a phantom echo lost in the fog and the rustling of the dolls. Now, it was clearer, a low, mournful drone that seemed to resonate within my bones. It wasn't sung, not exactly, more like a collective sigh, a lament drawn from the depths of the earth. It seemed to be emanating from the walls themselves, vibrating through the stone and into my very being. I stumbled forward, drawn by the chanting deeper into the mausoleum. The dolls multiplied, their porcelain faces a silent audience to my descent. They lined the walls, perched on shelves, clustered in corners. Hundreds of them, each frozen in a posture of quiet despair. A girl with a broken arm, a soldier with a vacant stare, a mother clutching a lifeless infant. Their painted eyes followed me, cold and unblinking. The scent of lilies intensified, almost choking me. The floor sloped downwards, leading to a hidden chamber I hadn't noticed before. A circular room, its walls lined with niches containing more dolls than I could count. They were arranged with chilling precision, a perfect circle surrounding a raised stone platform. The chanting grew louder, coalescing into something almost intelligible, a guttural cadence that scraped against my sanity. The air in the chamber was thick, stagnant, heavy with the weight of centuries. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering from the mausoleum entrance, each one a tiny shimmering ghost. My legs felt heavy, leaden. I wanted to turn back to flee this place of silent suffering, but something held me rooted to the spot, an invisible tether binding me to the chamber. The weight on my chest constricted, squeezing the air from my lungs. I clawed at my collar, gasping for breath, the petal-like growths on my neck throbbing with a faint internal pulse. The dolls seemed to lean forward, their painted eyes fixed on me with an almost palpable intensity. I felt a dizzying wave of disorientation, a sense of being surrounded, watched, judged. Memories flooded my mind, fragments of lives I hadn't lived, faces I didn't recognize. A woman's scream, a child's laughter, the clang of metal on stone. They were fleeting, ephemeral, yet they felt undeniably real, as if they were my own. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to shut out the memories, the chanting, the suffocating scent of lilies, but it was no use. The chamber seemed to be closing in on me, the walls shrinking, the dolls pressing closer. The weight on my chest became almost unbearable, a crushing pressure that threatened to suffocate me. A single drop of water flinked from the ceiling, echoing through the silence. Then another, and another, a rhythmic plink, plink, plink. That resonated with the chanting, and then I saw it. A colossal shadow looming behind me, blotting out the light. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but impossibly tall, its form indistinct, shrouded in darkness. I couldn't make out any details, no features, no clothing, just a towering silhouette against the gloom. A presence so immense, so overwhelming, that it stole the breath from my lungs. The chanting reached a fever pitch, a crescendo of sound that threatened to shatter my mind. A distant church bell boomed jarringly out of time. The chanting intensified, a churning vortex of sound that threatened to unravel the fragile threads of my sanity. It wasn't just a drone anymore. It was a language, a cadence. Fragments surfaced, dredged from the murky depths of memory. Hold fast, you swabs. The depths call. The voice. It was Hawthorne's. Captain Hawthorne. The name tasted like salt and regret on my tongue. The images followed, unbidden, brutal. The lash cracking against a sailor's back, the crimson welts blooming on his skin. The terrified whimpers swallowed by the relentless spray of the ocean. Hawthorne's face, a mask of granite severity, his eyes like chips of ice. He'd ruled the Fundafi Leviathan with an iron fist. A man who believed in obedience above all else. A man who practiced other things. Things I'd buried deep, convinced they were the product of fever dreams and the relentless rocking of the ship. Now, the dolls seemed to shift, to coalesce into something more than just porcelain and paint. Several of them bore a striking resemblance to men I'd served with Servant Silas. The carpenter, his face frozen in a perpetual grimace, Finnegan. The boatswain, his eyes wide with a terror I remembered all too well. They stood amongst the others, silent witnesses to Hawthorne's rituals. The cat, perched atop a crumbling sarcophagus, seemed to foity enjoy the unfolding horror. Its grin stretched wider, a grotesque parody of feline amusement. A rasping suing click echoed from its throat, a sound that sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I felt a tug, a subtle but undeniable pull, as if invisible strings were being drawn taut, manipulating my limbs, my thoughts. It was Hawthorne, I realized with a sickening certainty. He was sundoing Queen this. No, I choked out, the sound swallowed by the chanting. It's not real, it's just memory. But the words felt hollow, brittle, like leaves crumbling to dust. The weight on my chest pressed down, a suffocating presence that stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't just a sensation now. It felt like something twin sat there, heavy and cold. More phrases surfaced, clearer this time, woven into the chanting. The deep ones demand a tribute, a sacrifice to appease the tides. My stomach churned. I remembered the hushed whispers, the clandestine meetings in the ship's hold, the strange symbols carved into the wooden floor. Hawthorne had claimed they were ancient maritime traditions, necessary to ensure a safe voyage. I'd believed him then, desperate to cling to any semblance of order in the face of the vast, indifferent ocean. The room swam. The scent of lilies intensified, mingling with the metallic tang of blood and the cloying sweetness of decay. A low foot-in resonated from the walls, a mournful sigh that seemed to emanate from the very stone. I stumbled backward, my hands outstretched, grasping for something, anything, to anchor me to reality. My fingers brushed against the cold, damp stone of a niche, and I recoiled as if burned. Then, a voice, not the chanting, not the echoes of Hawthorne's commands, but a voice directly into my mind. "Anya, you remember?" It was Hawthorne's voice, but distorted, amplified, imbued with an unnerving resonance. It wasn't a memory anymore. It was present. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hands against my ears, desperate to block out the sound. But it pierced through, relentless, inescapable. "You were always my favorite, Anya. So observant, so willing." A shudder ran through me, a visceral tremor that shook my entire body. The cat emitted a low, guttural purr, a sound that felt like a mocking laugh. The chanting swelled, reaching a fever pitch. "She remembers. Bring her forth. The captain awaits." I felt a surge of panic, a desperate urge to flee. But my legs were leaden, my limbs unresponsive. I was trapped, a puppet on Hawthorne's strings, and then, the voice again, closer this time, whispering directly into my ear. "Welcome back, Anya. It's time you served your purpose." The stone pressed cold against my back, the dampness seeping through my threadbare coat. The passage I'd been certain led back to the main crypt had vanished, replaced by a continuation of the twisting, claustrophobic tunnel. It wasn't just a change in direction, the very geometry of the place seemed to be shifting. The walls pulsed with a faint, sickly green luminescence, the color leaching from the stone itself. Click, click, click. The sound echoed, a rhythmic percussion that amplified the frantic hammering of my heart. It was the sound of the dolls moving. I didn't dare turn. Each step forward was a gamble, a blind faith in some forgotten instinct. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of lilies and something else, something acrid and metallic like old blood. A low, furred groan resonated from the walls, a mournful sigh that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I stumbled, my hand scraping against the rough-hewn stone, drawing a thin line of crimson. The cat, silent as ever, padded ahead, its eyes gleaming in the unnatural light. It wasn't guiding me, it was serving, observing. The chanting, though muted, persisted, a constant thrumming beneath the surface of my awareness. It felt like a physical pressure, squeezing the air from my lungs. "The captain awaits. The captain awaits." The words weren't spoken aloud, but formed directly within my mind, a cold intrusion that sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through me. My legs felt like lead, each movement an act of sheer willpower. I focused on the texture of the stone beneath my fingertips, the gritty feel, a desperate anchor to reality. Then, I felt it. A presence, not the unsettling weight on my chest I'd grown accustomed to, but something larger, something looming. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The click, 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 intensified. Closer now, I risked a glance over my shoulder. They were everywhere. The dolls, not just scattered but arranged, mimicking my movements. A dozen porcelain faces, their painted eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. Each one a distorted reflection of myself, frozen in expressions of fear and resignation. They shuffled forward, their limbs moving with a jerky, unnatural grace. A rasping phony wheeze escaped from one, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. And then I saw him. A silhouette against the sickly green glow, impossibly tall, impossibly still. He didn't move, didn't speak, but the very air around him seemed to warp and distort. It was Hawthorne, or rather a grotesque parody of him. His form was elongated, distorted, his features exaggerated into a mask of chilling authority. The uniform, once crisp and military, now hung loose and ragged, stained with something dark and viscous. The air around him shimmered with heat. A low, guttural hum emanated from his form, vibrating through the stone and into my very bones. He wasn't walking. He was manifesting, solidifying from the shadows themselves. The chanting swelled, resonating from his very being. "The captain has returned." My mind screamed at me to run, to flee this nightmare. But my limbs remained unresponsive, locked in place by an unseen force. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, a strangled gasp lost in the oppressive silence. The dolls continued to advance, their porcelain faces mirroring my terror. I could feel their eyes on me, cold and assessing. The cat perched atop a crumbling pile of rubble, tilted its head, its grin widening into a grotesque parody of amusement. A low, guttural purr rumbled from its throat, a sound that felt like a mocking laugh. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for something. Then, a sudden chill, an icy breath on the back of my neck. It wasn't a gust of wind, it was a targeted exhalation, a predatory presence drawing near. The scent of lilies intensified, overwhelming, suffocating. I could feel the hairs on my arms stand on end, a primal warning screaming in my blood. I wanted to turn, to confront whatever was behind me, but I was paralyzed, trapped in a tableau of horror. The though click, 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 click of the dolls faded, replaced by the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps approaching from behind. The chill wasn't just cold, it was a damp, invasive presence, like being submerged in glacial water. It pressed against my back, a suffocating weight that amplified the feeling of something unseen behind me. The scent of lilies, already cloying, thickened into a suffocating miasma, coating my tongue with a sickly sweetness. I fought to breathe, to draw in air that wasn't saturated with the funereal perfume. The paralysis remained, a leaden grip on my limbs. I strained, a silent scream building in my throat, a desperate attempt to break the spell. The chanting. It wasn't just a sound now, it was a vibration, a tremor that resonated within my bones, twisting my insides. Fufu, the captain has returned. The captain has returned. Fu. The words were no longer just in my head, they seemed to emanate from the very stone around me, pulsing with a sickly green luminescence. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the images away, the distorted figure of Hawthorne, the grinning cat, the relentless advance of the dolls. A memory flickered, fragmented and distorted, like a reflection in shattered glass. A garden roses, my mother's hands pruning shears glinting in the sunlight. A child's laughter then, the laughter warped, twisted into something mocking, something cruel. The roses bled, their petals turning black and brittle. It was gone as quickly as it came, leaving me gasping for breath, disoriented and terrified. The paralysis lessened just enough for me to twitch a finger. Then another, a spark of defiance ignited within me, a desperate refusal to surrender to this encroaching madness. I focused on that spark, nurturing it, feeding it with the remnants of my will. The cat's purr intensified, a low rumble that seemed to mock my struggle. It circled Hawthorne, a silent dance of complicity. The creature's grin widened, revealing a flash of needle-sharp teeth that drip, drip. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a relentless percussion, a maddening rhythm that hammered against my skull. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, a symphony of decay. Then I understood. The tooth, the one I'd found nestled in the moss-covered stone. It wasn't a random find, it was a seed of the bloomrote. The chanting swelled, reaching a fever pitch. The dolls shuffled closer, their porcelain faces a grotesque mockery of humanity. I could feel their eyes on me, cold and assessing. My reflection, glimpsed in the polished surface of a nearby doll, wasn't my own. It flickered, distorted, revealing glimpses of something else. Something, floral, vines, thick and thorny, began to creep across my skin, visible for only a fleeting moment before disappearing. Panic clawed at my throat, a desperate, primal scream. I tried to remember. Who was I? What was I doing here? Fragments of a life, shattered and fragmented, swam just beyond my grasp. A ship. Salt spray on my face. A man's voice, gruff and comforting. Then, nothing. A blankness, a void. The paralysis receded further, allowing me to move my hand. I looked down. The skin was pale, translucent, stretched taut over the bones. And then I saw it. A bulge pushing against the surface. A dark, swollen knot. I watched horrified as a single perfect blossom erupted from my flesh. A crimson rose, its petals unfurling with unnatural speed. More followed. A cascade of blooms pushing through my skin, a grotesque parody of beauty. The scent of lilies intensified, mingling with the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil. The drip, drip, drip accelerated, a frantic pulse accompanying the horrifying transformation. The cat let out a satisfied hiss, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. The surge hit me like a rogue wave, not a physical impact but a corruption, a blossoming darkness that swallowed the light. The crimson rose, perfect and obscene, unfurled from my hand, its petals slick with an unnatural sheen. More followed, a riot of blooms erupting across my skin, my arms, my neck, my face, a grotesque garden pushing through flesh. The lily's cloying sweetness intensified, a suffocating blanket woven with the scent of damp earth and decay. I tasted it, the soil, the rot clinging to my tongue. The chanting reached a crescendo, a triumphant roar that resonated within the blossoming horror consuming me. My vision fractured. The dolls, the cat, Hawthorne Thuan, all dissolved into a swirling vortex of black and green. Then, clarity, a different room. Smaller, warmer, a cottage, undeniably. The scent of wood smoke and something vaguely familiar, cinnamon perhaps, attempted to mask the lingering floral miasma. I wasn't me. Not entirely. The memories, the fragments of a wailing ship, a mother's garden, were receding, fading like watercolors left in the rain. A profound sense of displacement settled over me, a hollowness where identity should have resided. The church bells, distant, mournful, and jarringly wrong. They tolled with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each clang a hammer blow against the fragile shell of my composure. Dong dong. Dong dong. They shouldn't be ringing. Not now. Not here. The air hung thick, heavy with a damp chill that clung to my skin like a shroud. I felt a weight on my chest, a crushing pressure that stole my breath. It wasn't physical, not precisely, but the sensation of someone sitting there observing, judging. I blinked, adjusting to the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. A woman stood across the room, her back to me. She was unpacking boxes, her movements slow and deliberate. A caretaker, I realized, the new caretaker. My replacement? The thought sparked a flicker of something. Not recognition, not grief, but a faint echo of loss. Then I saw him. The cat perched on the windowsill, bathed in the ethereal glow of the fog-laden cemetery beyond. Siamese, with eyes like chips of jade and a perpetual, unsettling grin stretched across his face. It was a mockery of a smile, cruel and knowing. He watched me with an unnerving intensity, his gaze seeming to penetrate my very being. The distant bells dong-donged again, each toll a mournful lament. The woman turned, her face etched with a weary kindness. "Welcome," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "It's a quiet place, isn't it?" I tried to speak, to form a greeting, but the words caught in my throat. The floral scent was overwhelming now, a suffocating sweetness that threatened to drown me. A single, perfect petunia, a splash of vibrant purple against the muted tones of the cottage floor, drew my eye. It bloomed directly beneath the floorboards, its velvety petals unfurling with unnatural grace. And then I saw it, a strand of long, dark hair tangled amongst the petunia's leaves. My hair. The cat let out a soft, chilling meow, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. A low rumble that vibrated in the floorboards, mirroring the incorrect cadence of the distant bells. Dong. The woman's gaze locked with the cat's, a silent exchange passing between them. A moment stretched, taut and unsettling. Then, a sensation. A fleeting brush against my cheek. I instinctively raised a hand, expecting to feel the rough texture of my skin. Instead, my fingers encountered something soft, velvety. A petal, crimson like the roses that now bloomed within me. The fog settled. A silent, suffocating embrace that swallowed the cemetery whole.